Good morning, Jade. Good morning, Leah. Today we have lesson 9 in our math. We have poetic language. So we're going to learn about some language that we use in poetry for our lesson for today. But before we get started, we are going to do some reviewing up here on the board. I have 2 sentences up here. Dean, Steve, and Randy are swimming. They should be home soon. All right, so what I want you guys to do first is I want you to pick out the pronoun in this sentence, okay? Where's our pronoun? Our pronoun would be they, right? They would be our pronoun. Now, if I would ask you what is its antecedent, if I want us to draw an arrow to its antecedent, where would our arrow go to? Remember, our antecedent is the words that our pronoun renames, all right? So we should draw it to Randy, Steve, and Dean, right? Because this is our pronoun that is renaming this. And this, remember, our word that our pronoun renames is called our antecedent. Now, I want you guys to diagram both of these sentences. Diagram them separately, so diagram this sentence and then diagram the last sentence, all right? So go ahead and grab a piece of paper and diagram those sentences, all right? And like always, just go ahead and pause our video and then unpause it after you guys are done diagramming your sentence to check, see if we're right, all right? So go ahead and pause our video right now and diagram these sentences. All right, you guys finished? Ready to check it? All right, so our first one, we should have drew our compound rocket, and we should have had our subjects as Dean, Steve, and Randy. Our conjunction needs to go on our dotted line there. And then our verb, we need to draw our line between our subject and our verb, are swimming, all right? And for the last sentence, they would be our subject, and then should be would be our verb, and our helping verb and our being verb, and then should be how, when, and where. They should be where, they should be home, and when, they should be home soon. So those are both adverbs that would go underneath our verb. All right, if you got those all right, just good job if you got them all right. All right, let's get into our lesson for today. All right, so what do you guys think of when you hear the words poetic language? What comes to your mind? Do you know poems have a certain type of language that they use? And that's what we're going to learn about today. Let's start reading at the top of page 31 in our teaching box about poetic language. Poets carefully choose words with the correct connotation, a certain sound, the needed accent, or even a special appearance to bring about poetic language. Poetry uses unusually formed sentences to sound poetic. Poetry often uses uncommon words for special effect and for exact meaning. More so than other writing, poetry tries to be beautiful and tries to stir emotions. All right, let's jump to the next paragraph. I want you guys to catch what they're saying in this next paragraph, so listen close. Simply writing lines that rhyme or lines with meter does not make poetry. Notice how the rhyming lines below on the left-hand side do not use poetic language. Notice the poetic language of the poem. All right, so they have 2 poems there in that box for you. The one on the left says, I have a pig that is very big. My friend's name is Ruth. I have a loose tooth. The one on the right says, God is at the anvil. God is at the anvil beating out the sun, where molten metal spills at his forge among the hills. He has hammered out the glory of a day that's done. God is at the anvil, welding golden bars. In the scarlet streaming flame, he is fashioning a frame for the shimmering silver beauty of the evening stars. All right, notice the difference in those 2 poems. Just because we write stanzas which are our lines or our paragraphs in our poem, just because we write stanzas that have rhyming words and the correct meter in them doesn't make it poetry. For example, let's look up here on the board. I have 2 lines up here. The first one says, "Look at this flower, let's climb a tower." So, we have the correct meter and we have the correct rhyme in these 2 sentences, but it doesn't really stir our emotions, or it doesn't really, there's not a continuous thought that we're combining together. So, what about this next one? "This blood-red majestic flower is like a queen within a tower." That kind of sounds a little bit better, right? And it's comparing, it's this blood-red majestic flower is like a queen within a tower. So if you think of a queen in a tower, she's standing there all beautiful and things like that. And that would be kind of how a red blood or a blood-red majestic flower would look. Notice the difference in using poetic language. And I'm sure as I was reading that, you guys, your emotions were probably stirred more when I read this one than that one up there. Because this blood-red majestic flower is like a queen within a tower. So poetry has a certain language that we use. We use certain words that have the correct connotation, which is the meaning of our word. We use words that have certain sounds that go with our poem. We use words with the needed accents, and we use words that bring it to life, all right? So when we're writing poetry, we need to use all of our vocabulary, and vocabulary that we might not be familiar with. We can broaden our use of vocabulary, especially when writing poems. It makes for a great poem and a very interesting poem to read. So for your new part today, you're going to read the poem and you're going to do the following exercises 1 through 4. So I wanted to print out a picture of some hands. There was a picture of just some plain old hands that didn't look very special or anything. And then there was another picture of hands that were very detailed and they looked like they were worn hands. They had a lot of character. And that's the difference between writing a poem that has good poetic language and bad poetic language, or no poetic language at all. So if you think of a picture of some boring hands, just maybe animated, they're not much character in them, and then you think of some hands that have a lot of detail, and that is what poetic language does to our poem. It brings it to life, and it gives a lot of detail. I hope you guys have a great Thursday, and I will see you guys tomorrow, hopefully, for your quiz. Don't forget to study for your quiz, study hard, study your checklist on page 35. Make sure you go over all of those things, have someone help you study, and go over your spelling words, and be sure you are ready for your quiz on Friday. All right? Your quiz is all about poetry, so make sure you go over that checklist. See you, girls.